The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Deep right, we got Kickstarter. Let's follow a range on Detroit. I do not have that on the target right now. I've got a submarine right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Welcome back to the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight, we're going to roll the clock back a couple of years. And let me say it's an embarrassing couple of years, because tonight we're going to talk about a pair of games that have been sitting on my desk or in my closet or bookcase of shame for over 2 years now. That's right. Back in November 2020, we talked about 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force from Fortress Games. And I still have them sitting here in plastic bags, unpunched in front of me. But that's all right. You know, I'm not the worst gamer when it comes to these things. At least I have looked at the rules, unlike our very own Steve Toth, who has not even familiarized himself with these games in the 2 years. Steve, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, I honestly don't even know what a bomb group is. So, I mean, you're way ahead of me.
We proved that in the previous interviews. Bomb groups, what are those? You actually organize your bombers? But that's fine. Steve and I will be here tonight. We're going to go back over with Bob Phaneuf from Fortress Games, the second edition for 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force that has just hit Kickstarter. Bob, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Good to talk to you again, and good to talk to you, Steve.
It's good to have you on the podcast. I feel guilty, like we talked about, prior to the intro. I still haven't broken the games out. I've carried them on trips. I've honestly tried to get them on the table, and I just haven't. And then to top it off, I've been that standard Kickstarter supporter. I picked up your Vietnam and your Afghanistan pair of games, and neither of those two have been played either. So I probably have not a leg to stand on to interview you to talk about these games because I haven't played the first edition. But we're going to go for it anyway, and we're going to talk about some of the changes and some of the things that you all have done differently in this edition. But
I know the spirit is willing, but sometimes the flesh is weak.
that is so true, and it's I feel bad about some of the games that I've picked up because I look at my closet or shelves of shame, as I should call them now, and there's some things that have had repeat plays in the time that other ones haven't made it onto the table. So I have not done a good job of prioritizing my spread around all the games that I've picked up. But that's, as me and a couple gamers were talking this weekend, that's one of the good problems is there's too many games and not enough time. We actually had delved back into the dark ages for anyone who is a science fiction miniatures gamer and remembers the game Full Thrust, which was a spaceship combat game from back in the 80s and 90s. And that's when I'd owned the rules since the late 80s and had never played it. So it took me, 30 plus years to get that one on the table. But that's all right. Well, I'll do better than that with 8th and 20th. But let's talk about the first Kickstarter. So November 2020, you went to Kickstarter. You had about 80 some odd backers, blew through your goal, pretty quickly anyway, and ended up with, I think, about $9,700, I think, or somewhere around there. And obviously went to press with that. What was your experience that first Kickstarter for 8th and 20th?
Yeah, it was. Thanks for asking. It was a great experience, and you're right. We had a very successful Kickstarter campaign, and then actually a little embarrassingly, completely ran out of games maybe a month after the Kickstarter, because then we sold on Amazon. We sold out of everything we had. So
I hate it when that happens. Darn it,
yeah,
we sold
right.
all of our stock. That's terrible.
We actually had nothing left, so we rushed to a second print, and fortunately, our print partner was awesome. And for about a month and a half, our shelves were empty, and then that's never happened again. We stocked up well the second time around, and frankly, it gave us a chance to fix a few little, that was our very first Kickstarter campaign ever, and our very first games that we published ever. So as you might imagine, we had a few little, learning curve errors that the second print gave us a chance to fix.
Well, good. And I laugh about a lot of that because it's like everything on the internet where you think people knock it out of the park the first time. It's like for us in the miniatures wargaming world, when people post a photo of their miniature, go, "This is my first attempt at painting a miniature. Does anyone like it?" And you're like, "Look, dude, you've been painting miniatures for like 15 years. It's obvious this is not your first miniature. We're not falling for this on the internet." But everyone's going to have to learn and learn about producing things and proofreading and all those painful things that go into actually producing a game. But it at least seemed to me, once again, full disclosure, having not played this, that at least things were worked through and you had a much smoother game than a lot of people sometimes kick out there for a first edition. And I think that's an important kind of milestone for people to think about is it's still a first edition. I mean, I look over at my Dungeons and Dragons shelf at the second edition D&D that looks like it was drawn with crayons. I think it actually was. And some of the rules are horribly broken. So we forget the things we used to accept in first and second edition games. And everyone's kind of become a little bit of a perfectionist these days.
Yeah, we worked very hard to get the rules right. And to your point, we never had to publish any errata. What we did have to do was point out to gamers parts of the rules that they needed to study rather than skim over.
Yeah.
So we had certain aspects that we kept getting questions and people were playing some parts wrong, not because the rules weren't there, but because we hadn't drawn sufficient attention. And so that was a lesson we learned. It's not just getting the rules right, which again we did. We didn't have to do any errata, but it's also making sure people understand, hey, this is critically important that you understand this part. Otherwise, the rest of the pieces don't fall together. So we expected to learn some lessons, and we had a good team that worked, the play testing hard and the rules hard. But there is nothing. You can practice all you want, but when you go out on the field and you play a real game, things happen that you didn't expect. But we generally were happy with the result.
Well, and people a lot of times forget the scale of playtesting versus the first week that a game hits the market and is in people's hands, that even if you had 10 people on your playtest team, they probably were not going to knock out the same number of games as your entire audience knocks out in that first month.
Right.
Just orders of magnitude of what the games people buy, the times they play it. And I'll be honest, having participated in and still working on a game design with DVG games for Fulcrum Leader and helping out with Eagle Leader, it's funny to see the things that you get through the playtest phase and people still make the mistake in the main game, and you're like, I'm pretty sure it's in the rules. Are you people just not reading the rules? Are you just picking up the components and trying to play this game without reading the rules? But everybody reads and skims through the rules differently and focuses on different things. So it's kind of an interesting exercise to see what people miss and what game concepts you think you made perfectly obvious that it was a key component of the game, and then all your players just didn't read that part of the rules because it was the last section of the rule book.
Well, one of the things we learned and we're doing in the second editions, we did to some extent in Save Afghanistan Comrade and Save South Vietnam, but much more so in the second edition of 8th and 20th Air Force, is virtually every section of the rules will have an illustrated example and differentiated in color and appearance enough that if you're comfortable with the rule, you immediately see this is an example. You skim right over it, go to the next rule. If you want to read the example, you can read it. But we're constructing it so it's easy to read the rule. Always have an example there, typically again with an illustration, including counters or sections of the map, because that was one of the big pieces of feedback we learned from our first edition. Is people love visual examples. They love visual. A rule, even though it seems relatively easy to understand, it's a ton more easy to understand if you see 3 or 4 game pieces in front of you with arrows pointing at what you're supposed to do with them.
Absolutely. And something I just saw reinforced this weekend was a lot of times games that can be broken up into incremental parts to offer a scenario or a playthrough or something that at least takes people through that first iteration of it. They go, okay, I've got the basic rules down, then let me have a scenario that takes me through some optional rules, then maybe one that takes me through some more advanced rules, because nothing will cause people to find all the holes in their knowledge like actually sitting down and pushing the counters around and realizing they have no idea what that factor on the counter is for.
Right.
Well, cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about the big changes. What what did you really find out in first edition didn't work? Was there anything that you said, "Oh crap! When we change the rules, we've got to go in and we've got to fix this"?
Well, thank goodness. Actually, no. In fact, one of the reasons we were publishing the second editions is people love the game so much. The feedback we've gotten on the game, on the games themselves, the way the games operate and the way you play them, and how victories achieved, et cetera, et cetera. Frankly, 99% was positive feedback. People really did love the gameplay. What we consistently heard was, look, these components, the game board, the folio, et cetera, are not up to par with the quality of the game. In fact, there's a YouTuber who does World War II solitaire war games who ranked 20th Air Force the one of the top 5 games he'd ever played in his reviews, and 8th Air Force in the top 10. And during his announcement of where he found those games, where he especially talking about 20th Air Force in his top 5 games of all time, he said now. He was holding up one of our player aids. He said, "Now it'd be great if the next step was these player aids actually met the quality in terms of production as the games themselves."
Yeah.
And so we realized, this is our first effort, and one of the things we learned is we could do a lot better on the graphics, on the components, and on the game board artwork. So we went right back to we redid all of the artwork. Nice. And we settled for nothing but what we thought was very high quality artistic presentation. Our original aircraft counters were silhouettes, similar to, if anybody in the audience has played the Avalon Hill game Luftwaffe, and I'm sure a lot of people have. The silhouettes were sort of like that, even more basic. This time there's actual artwork of the airplanes themselves. The map board was a very basic geographic outline of Japan or geographic outline of occupied Europe. Now there's topography and a lot more dimensionality to it. So we put a lot more into the artwork of the game in order to draw in to make for more immersion into the game graphics and the game itself. And there, I think. Hopefully we'll get feedback that we succeeded there. The feedback we've gotten so far from people who have looked at the Kickstarter and what's available, what's been posted up on Board Game Geek, has been very, very positive. But the especially exciting thing, Doug, to make sure I'm answering your question clearly, is nobody said this game. Or obviously people have suggestions about gameplay, but there wasn't anything consistent of saying, boy, the game would be good if it had this, but it's really lacking that, so it's not. People said, boy, do we absolutely love this game. Hopefully in the future, the graphics, et cetera, come up to the level of the gameplay.
That's awesome. And that's one of the funny things we've just gone through with Fulcrum is redoing all the card graphics because we finally got our graphic designer back. So it's a little frustrating in our case when you're post Kickstarter, you're redoing your graphics. But like you said, people really demand a high quality of graphics these days, especially with a game that has good gameplay. I think it's one thing if people play through a game like, wasn't that great, whatever. But when they play through and they enjoy the game and then they look at the art compared to the other games they enjoy and they've played, they're like, well, I kind of wish it had a better visual appeal to it, a little more tactile feel with heavier maps, heavier map boards, and stuff like that becomes such an interesting component of gaming. Because I was just looking at I'm trying to remember which company it was. It was a supplement for the Traveler role-playing game. I was looking at the counter art, and it was horrible because it was these just black and white sketches that I don't know where they got them of all the characters. And then the ship art was black outline, so it wasn't even like a silhouette with line art to it. It was just a black silhouette, and that was the standard. And it's just so funny to see where we've come. That if you put out stuff that even if the game has great gameplay, there are people that won't get over the hurdle of what do the counters look like, or what does the map board look like. Well,
that's absolutely right. In fact, I'll embarrass myself a little bit. One of the feedbacks we got of our original Kickstarter, I think he was the person was looking at the 20th Air Force, but it made me laugh and cringe at the same time. He said, looking at the cover of the 20th Air Force folio, reminds me of picking up and reading my 8th grade history book. I thought, oh my God,
Okay, fair enough.
We've got some work to do. But I don't think anybody's going to say that about the second editions. And actually, Doug, you can draw your own conclusions. You've got on your shelf of shame, you've got Save South Vietnam, and you've got the 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force. And I challenge. Oh, there you go.
The shelf of shame, right there.
That's awesome. By the way, I think you'd really enjoy that game. I absolutely love. You always love your own games, but I love Save South Vietnam.
Yeah. Well, I've been so bad about it that it's one of those funny points. That there's games you get super excited about, and then you get snowballed, and everything else comes up, and you're like, I'm just buried under this avalanche of things to do. And I have learned recently, like with this last weekend, that no, I'm just going to parcel out time to game. That if I let everything else drive my schedule, I will never get any gaming in. So it's my own personal hill to climb.
Well, what you'll find if you when you have a moment, pull out the game board of 8th Air Force and pull out the game board of Save South Vietnam and put them side by side, and you'll see what will be the difference between the original 8th Air Force and the second edition 8th Air Force and the second edition 20th Air Force. That quality change that you see from the original Kickstarter to what you see in Save South Vietnam will be equivalent to what you'll see in the new edition of the two games.
Well, good. Well, let's go over the original games, at least the original gameplay and the concept, because there are some people who won't go that many episodes back to listen to our 2020 talk about the game. But let's talk about the core construct of the games, because obviously they are geared towards the strategic bombing campaigns, either European or Pacific, and geared to a level that is somewhat generalized but specific in being able to target certain nodes of the industry or of the target country's capabilities. So just tell us a little bit about the kind of the strategic structure of the game.
Great. I'll give you a thumbnail description / elevator pitch of both games.
Exactly. Perfect.
So both games are group scale. So you're commanding groups, and the game system is commanding enemy groups. 8th Air Force, you're in command of the U.S. Army Air Force from January 1943 until May 1945, and your job is to conduct a strategic bombing campaign of Germany while also supporting other priorities that SHAEF requires of you. So you, at the beginning of the game, in addition to trying to knock out German industry, you're also being ordered to attack Germany's submarine pens in western France to aid the Battle of the Atlantic and to knock out bridges and railroads in France and Germany to support the eventual D-Day landing. So you've got some distractions that you have to deal with, while at the same time you're trying to destroy Germany's aircraft industry, oil industry, and strategic war industries. And the game rewards you in different ways for hitting those targets. When you hit the German aircraft factories, it reduces their aircraft output. Their oil facilities make their aircraft less efficient, and the war industries give you victory points. The 20th Air Force, same concept. You're the 20th Air Force, the USAAF, attacking Japan from the Marianas with B-29 bombers. Big difference. There's no fighters in the game. Your B-29s are going up against the Japanese defenses, and you're hitting again the aircraft industry, oil and infrastructure, but you're also hitting the housing. You're trying to destroy you're actually trying to destroy the cities to activate the minor cities, whose destruction gets you victory. But this game involves the 20th Air Force involves research. So you start out at doing high altitude precision bombing of, say, an aircraft factory. By the end of the war, you're doing low altitude area bombing with incendiaries of targets large and small. You're dropping atom bombs on targets. You're entirely destroying cities with incendiaries. So it takes on quite a different, in terms of the game you're playing at the end of 20th Air Force versus the beginning, that might be the most dramatic difference I've seen in any game I've either designed or played. You start out with a very small force with limited offensive capability, and you finish with a incredibly powerful Air Force that absolutely wreaks destruction in its path.
Awesome. When you went through and had to obviously tweak the strategic picture between 8th and 20th, is there anything that then when you came back to the second edition, you said, okay, I just got to mess with it. I can't leave well enough alone. Anything that players are going to see in the second edition that they're going to feel is a slight modification to that.
In terms of the games themselves, actually, in terms of basic game, no. What I did do is I said these games are so full of these campaigns are so full of other things that realistically could have happened. So I put in a bunch of new optional rules that make for it. And I'm not a big fan of optional rules that go off on tangents that just weren't going to happen. These are optional rules that either that allow you to do something that did happen, or something that really could have or even should have happened. For example, 8th Air Force, and I honestly think people are going to absolutely love this. One of the optional rules, I bet everybody plays with the optional rule as opposed to a lot of times when I never play the optional rules. This one it would be hard to resist. But one of the things that could have happened, and I know everybody in this audience is an air power buff, so they know this. Germany could easily have deployed jet fighter aircraft much earlier in the war than they did, for a variety of reasons, including interference from Berlin and Hitler. For a variety of reasons, they took a long time to get out, really not until 1945 in terms of being truly effective. Well, one of the optional rules I have is that those German jets get introduced earlier, as early as April 1944, and in an interesting twist, the American response is to accelerate their own jet aircraft program. So you, as the Americans, start receiving jet aircraft. Initially, not terribly effective aircraft, but very rapidly they become technically effective. So you'll have Gloster Meteors and F-80s shooting around the sky in dogfights with Me-262s, and we're even introducing the Hinkle 162 into the regular game. That was one tweak to the regular game. We did not include the Hinkle 162, the Salamander, I think was the most common term used for it. But it was a very, very good jet fighter. Right. And we didn't have it in the original game because it was used in fairly limited quantities. But we are putting into the regular game in the 8th Air Force, not even an optional rule. On the 20th Air Force, we introduced option to have fighters. Now, when we give a disclaimer, if you include the fighter option, the game is much easier. I mean, the fighters will tear up the Japanese fighters as they right. did. The 7th Air Command flew out of Iwo Jima with P-51s very effectively. And then we also, what I think is a really neat twist, is we introduced the 8th Air Force, which, as many people will know, was in the process of re-equipping and redeploying to Okinawa. They were re-equipping with B-29s, and we're going to begin their own air campaign out of Okinawa. And so starting in September 1945, if the war hasn't ended, the 8th Air Force can start being introduced in an optional rule. So the optional rules were the biggest change, and I think they're a heck of a lot of fun.
That sounds good. We've talked a lot about the Luftwaffe introducing jets and how those things have changed. And obviously, Brett, who's not on tonight, is a huge fan of late war unique aircraft, whether jet or otherwise. I'm sure he'd be so disappointed there's not a DO-335 squadron represented in the game somewhere. But the fact is, there's a lot of interesting what ifs. I mean, we all knew that because of industrial capacity, the Germans are going to lose the war. But if you introduce jet air power earlier, can they hold off? Can they, pull another year or two out before they're just overwhelmed industrially, and that there's no going back. But what if stuff like that's always fun. We were having a discussion about some of it involving history and war games this last weekend, and in a sense, it allows you to sometimes rewrite the end conditions. If the Germany lasts longer, does that mean the Russians actually seize more territory? Does that mean the Allies, the U.S. and U.K. actually have more opportunity to liberate more of Europe? And how does all of that shake out? So I think it always makes for kind of a fun exercise there.
Absolutely. In fact, in 20th Air Force, if you lose the game, it's not because America lost the war. It's because you reached the end of the line, and the United States had to launch Operation Olympic, which was the beginning of Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. And the game basically says if the U.S. has to launch Operation Olympic and troops have to invade Japan, you failed in your strategic bombing campaign. So it's not that America lost the war, but you lost as the commander of the 20th Air Force.
Right. Well, that's a cool way to look at it. Well, let's shift a little bit, and we'd mentioned Save South Vietnam and Comrade Save Afghanistan, or Save Afghanistan, Comrade. Let's talk a little bit about those. How did you go from doing all this work for air power games to counterinsurgency games? What was the shift there?
So interestingly, the Save Afghanistan and Save South Vietnam games were designed a long, long time ago, and at the time we weren't thinking of becoming a game publisher. We played them for our own amusement, and we loved them. What happened? The only reason we became a game publisher is we created this 8th Air Force for our own amusement, and determined this is. In our opinion, I don't mean to be unhumble here, but in our opinion, we said this is way too good of a game to not publish. We got to figure out a way to get this out in the market, and the twin game 20th Air Force, Save South Vietnam, Save Afghanistan. We loved them. We thought they were the purest insurgency war games that we'd ever seen. The political power and the military power are differentiated. You can be doing great militarily, but doing horrifically politically, but it's not done in some artificial manner. It's all
right.
A very natural flow, and we loved it. We loved the games, and when we figured out how to publish war games, we said, well, these are the natural two to go out. We like this idea of twin game concepts anyway, and these are natural to go out. Obviously, different than 8th and 20th, but they work the same way. Solitaire games, and you've got great challenges in both games. In Save Afghanistan, Comrade, it is almost a pure insurgency. Right. Save South Vietnam is a little different because you have a very powerful North Vietnam, which intercedes in a very aggressive fashion with massive divisions all the way from 1965 till the end of the war in 75. So different wars, so very different game experience, but they're both a lot of fun, and they allow you to play the political side and the military side simultaneously.
Oh, good. Yeah, maybe I'll get those on the table here one of these days, since I've failed horribly on that one as well.
Well, if you know, right. You've probably heard of Wayne Hansen, who loves to do reviews, and he's a very popular reviewer, and he said Save South Vietnam is the best solitaire Vietnam game that's out there. So take from him, I took that as a high praise. We're very proud of that.
Yeah, exactly. No, I'll have to go work through both of them, because I've enjoyed a lot of counterinsurgency style games in my time, but the problem is they either minimize one or the other. Either it's written from a perspective that the military power was going to win, or from that it was all political power that's going to make it happen. And so it always kind of nerfs the other. So I'll be interested to take that on and to try that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's tough to find a good Vietnam, using Vietnam, because there's more games about Vietnam than Afghanistan, which is unfortunate, because Afghanistan is a fascinating conflict to study.
Absolutely.
A fascinating conflict. But but if you look at Vietnam games, they tend to focus heavily on the military, and that is just an incorrect approach. In Save South Vietnam, you can chopper the first cav all around Vietnam and whip all hell out of the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese and lose the war in 1973.
Right. Weird how that works out.
Yep, that can happen. But if you use your South Vietnamese regiments wisely in pacification, and use your American troops wisely in things like the Cambodia incursion and the counteroffensive after Tet and things like that, then you can and will win the game. But you've got to play the political side, the military side properly.
Well, I'm sure people want us to delve deeply into that, and that probably sounds like another episode, because my question is a little more cerebral. So in especially 20th Air Force, where you have a lot of firebombing, use of atomic weapons, and in two counterinsurgency games well, let's be honest, counterinsurgency is not precision sanitized warfare. It's very personal and very dirty. Did you ever run up against things you said, okay, maybe I need to generalize this, or I don't necessarily want to model certain things in specific? Or did you run across negative feedback where people said, hey, I get it, you made a game about it, but do we really have to have the option to take actions X, Y, and Z? I
expected to get that, especially in 20th Air Force. The 20th Air Force Air Force's campaign against Japan was a incredibly brutal campaign, as again, I'm sure everyone in your audience knows. The use of incendiaries, Operation Meeting House, the March air assault, fire assault on Tokyo, March 1945, was the deadliest air raid of World War II, more deadly than the two atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And during the game, you're pursuing the ability to unlock those minor city targets that you then have to firebomb to win. Again, I created a game that was based on the actual strategy of the war. I'm not sugarcoating anything. It was a very violent war. In fact, the top of the game board in 20th Air Force has Curtis LeMay's quote, which is something to the effect of cause enough destruction and pain to your enemy to make them quit quickly. And that was his approach. His approach was to attack Japan extremely violently. The game's a little shorter than 8th Air Force. You don't have as much time to go through the attritional aspects of the 8th Air Force's campaign. Your job is to devastate things very quickly. And I portrayed it very realistically, and I was prepared to defend it. But I think, people who play games such as we do understand we're playing a war game. By definition, it's violent. Even if you're doing the Battle of Waterloo, the amount of soldiers killed at Waterloo was shocking when you look at the number of troops involved. And war is by definition violent, but war also has aspects of it that are someone once described wars as the exclamation marks of history, and I think it's very true. And you ignore them or don't try to understand them at your own peril. So I feel 20th Air Force makes an important contribution in helping people understand just how aggressive and how violent the U.S. approach was to defeating Japan before U.S. troops had to invade the home islands, and it's portrayed, I think, fairly realistically.
Yeah, I think that is something that has been lost in a lot of the history, and I'll be honest, I feel it's a lot of the whitewashing that we've done of World War II history, that we kind of leave the atomic weapons use as in a sense the penultimate horrible thing, and no one ever really thinks about the actions of all the intentional firebombing of urban areas. It was not, like trying to firebomb a weapons plant in the middle of Tokyo. It was literally firebombing Tokyo and taking advantage of our ability to burn the town to the ground. And I think that's an important historical point to make, because we have, in some ways, I think, tried to evolve our way of war. But at the end of the day, people forget that when it comes down to an attritional kind of warfare, a lot of times all bets are off, and it's something that you don't want to be a part of. You don't want to wage it. There's nothing glorious about doing that, but sometimes the powers that be determine that's the best way to quickly wear down the enemy and expend the least number of your own nation's lives.
Yeah, that's correct. In fact, probably the most negative I've received of any of the games that Fortress Games has published is a few negative responses regarding even being willing to portray the Soviet Union and Afghanistan, given the perception there as the evil empire and the atrocities that the Russians conducted. Obviously, atrocities aren't part of the game, but the Russians were pretty lousy in Afghanistan in the 80s, and there's certainly plenty of controversy around the U.S. involvement in Vietnam in the 1960s, but the most pushback I've gotten on any of those games was about some people don't like the idea of playing the part of the Russians in Afghanistan.
Well, I guess they're probably not going to play a copy of Fulcrum Leader, because we have two Afghanistan scenarios.
We know a lot about Russian atrocities at Lead Pursuit Podcast, right?
Yeah, that's true. We've become unpopular for saying bad things about the Russians and the Soviets over time. So, oh well, that's all right. Steve, you're going to have to come up with a new color that will be something for Afghanistan. Since we've already made fun of gulags and been counseled. I was actually Gulag Gray.
My brain was going down the direction of 20th Air Force paint colors. I'm sure we could do something nice with that for the Pacific.
That will be thoroughly offensive, I'm sure, when you come up with those. We will not release those at Adepticon. But Steve brings up a good point. I mean, that it's interesting how people view the Soviet Union and the difference between World War II and Afghanistan. Both, in a sense, wars of occupation. People don't want to hear this. That, guess what? There was a lot of Soviet occupation involved in the entire part of World War II. It wasn't just them defending against being beat up on as poor innocent people by the Nazis. That level of atrocity is something inherent in Russian military doctrine, and for whatever reason, people are willing to play the Russians in World War II, even knowing the horrible things they did as soon as they reconquered Poland, as soon as they reconquered Eastern Europe. But then it becomes horrible when you're in the 1980s in Afghanistan. But it's tragically how they view subordinate populations and occupied countries.
Well, in fact, the Soviet Union in the war in Afghanistan, people forget that they were overthrowing a communist dictator there named.
In a sense, overthrowing their own buddy, which is kind of interesting. Of course, I guess we did the same in Vietnam. Would you look at that too? But yeah, it's fascinating when you see why they invaded and you kind of start piecing that together.
Right. Particularly diabolically, they told Amin that they were putting troops throughout the strategic points in the country to support him in his fight against the rising insurgency, when the real point was to make sure they occupied the strategic points when they shot him.
Right.
And that's how that conflict began. Was the country was occupied before they even launched the coup. Yeah,
and there's an interesting part to that where, obviously there's so much, as I'll call it, the Red Dawn mystique that we had in the 1980s on how the Soviets were going to, do this large aerial assault, and people were like, that'll never happen. And then they forget what actually happened in Afghanistan, where between the ground and air and commando forces, pretty much Amin woke up one morning and the Russians were everywhere and assaulting the palace.
Exactly.
So it's the Soviets proved they were masters of deception, and that if you were not watching closely, they were able to amass forces and to redeploy quickly. But going back to the differences with their war in Afghanistan versus American counterinsurgency in Vietnam, they just never could capitalize on the mobility. They tried aerial mobility, and even before the Red Eye and Stinger missiles were introduced in Afghanistan, they just never were able to move large units around the battlefield the way that the U.S. did. And that's always one of those interesting things you look back at and you wonder, how did they not learn, 20 years later from, 15 years later from our mistakes with air mobile? But they really didn't.
Yeah, you're exactly right. In fact, the games you'll eventually get those games off your shelf of shame and play them, and you'll find that's reflected. If you play Save Afghanistan Comrade, then play Save South Vietnam, one of the things that will strike you is, wow, the American forces are much more air mobile and much more capable of concentrating military power quickly, and frankly, standing up and fighting longer. The Soviet military in Afghanistan was not a powerful force comparable to, say, the U.S. military force in Vietnam in 1966. Call it.
Well, and you probably know this from obviously all your research and making a game about it, but I was fascinated how artillery heavy they were, and it was kind of their point of pride that they didn't feel like they had to be mobile, because they viewed even a counterinsurgency as a World War II firepower duel. And you had to sit there and go, but don't you need infantrymen to hold it? Don't you want to rapidly redeploy via helicopter? And all the things that we had thought about and how we'd built fire bases in our construct for fighting a counterinsurgency. And the Russians just, it was not that way at all. So,
yeah, an army that wasn't quite properly equipped for the war it was fighting.
That's an understatement. Although I'll make the case, not many armies are properly equipped. It seems they seems like you always figure that out after the fact.
Yeah, you figure it out later.
We should listen to the guys that said buy that system over there or buy fewer of something else. So that's much of the argument now with the Marine Corps as we're going through our force redesign. And being a retired Marine, I get to sit on the sidelines and listen to all the young guys tell us how we didn't know what we were doing in the last 100 and some odd years of our Marine Corps history, and then they want to redesign and change everything. So Good. Have fun. Enjoy fighting the Chinese with one regiment.
Right.
We'll see how that
right.
works out for you. Regiment with Patriot missiles and cruise missiles.
Yeah,
We'll
even
see
if
how
it's
that
a
works out.
smart regiment, you might need more than one.
Yeah, exactly. That's been my point. Is I'm glad you're redefining one regiment. That's not going to hold the Chinese very long, but
Right.
so be it. Anyway, so to kind of continue and to bring this back to the second edition of the games, have you thought about another printing for your Afghanistan and Vietnam games, or are those probably going to wait for a later date?
Well, the games, the 20th Air Force and 8th Air Force are going into boxes, of course, and
That's right. And I forgot to bring that up.
Yeah, they're going into
getting
boxes.
fancy on us.
Yes, getting fancy. These are 11 and a quarter by 8 and 3/4 by 1 inch boxes. So it'll be a regular bookshelf box. Again, I encourage everyone to go to Board Game Geek. You can see the exhibits that show you that how these things look, or go to, of course, to the Kickstarter site, even better. But the only that will be the only difference in the quality between the 8th and 20th second editions and Save Afghanistan and Comrade and Save South Vietnam. Those Save Afghanistan, Comrade, and Save South Vietnam have very high quality components, high quality artwork. And I wouldn't really be changing those. There's always room to add more to the directions to make them clearer and clearer and things like that. But both those games have a lot of examples within them, especially Save South Vietnam. Lots of examples in there of how to play. So, no, there wouldn't be a lot. I can't imagine a second edition comparable to what we're doing for 8th and 20th. 8th and 20th. Part of it is almost guilt, because we were just such a young company, and we published what we thought was a great product. And the most happy outcome for me is that we get feedback that we did build a great product. But awesome. The feedback is always, boy, the graphics should be equal to the quality of the game, and that's where the fix really takes place, is getting the graphic quality to where it should be for games of we think this quality.
Oh, absolutely. I just still have to laugh because thinking about Mariner Games, the partnership that is kind of the overarching thing above Lead Pursuit podcast, and my buddy Pat working through releasing Star Force Commander. And every once in a while we keep saying, this is just the first edition. This is just the first edition. We're going to change some things.
Right.
Because absolutely you end up either with counter art that isn't as good as you'd like, or you just have to make a compromise somewhere. And I know between the counter art and some of the component quality, that's where we made compromises. We've kind of said, yeah, when this goes to a boxed edition with a hard rule book and everything else, then we can fix those things.
Yeah. Well,
change the cover art, things like that.
And there's a learning process to everything, and now we know how to compose the graphic art, and how to do these things, and where to spend the time on the components and on the artwork, et cetera. So we've become better at that as we're a more mature company, and I think it'll show in the product.
Well, and I'll ask a tough question there is, was there much mentorship from the rest of the board game community, or was it mostly your players and your fans that said, hey, I know another artist, or hey, I recommend you do this like this other company did? Did anyone kind of help you along, close ranks with you, or did, as we so often find a lot of times in commercial ventures, the best help was from somebody's cousin's aunt's, guy that does graphic design for their hair salon or whatever?
Yeah. I'd say a little bit of all of that. I mean, most of the feedback we got in terms of things that we should concentrate on came from our loyal customers, who said, I love this game. Here's a typical feedback: I love this game regardless. But if you guys have another reprint, here's what I suggest: this, and this.
Right.
And like I said, Daniel from World War II Solitaire Board Games, holding up the research track in 20th Air Force and saying, it's basically a piece of paper with some numbers on it. And it's a little bit more than that, but he was right. Of course, the new research track is beautiful and colorful and immersive. So, it was really, the feedback was mostly from players, and again, mostly from players who love the games. I think if someone didn't love the game, they didn't really care if the artwork wasn't very good. But we got so much feedback of, I just love this game. If you guys, it'd be great if you could take this artwork to the next generation.
That's cool. Well, speaking of next generation, what's up next? I know you probably don't want to totally reveal what your next projects are, but what are you guys thinking about? What are y'all looking at over at Fortress Games for the next wave of things that I will have on my shelf for 2 years and not played? Now, I'm going to fix that.
Well, that's awesome. I know you will. And as you recall, you were the first one to find out when we were releasing Save Afghanistan, Save South Vietnam. As I promised you, and I'll make the same promise now. We do have 2 more games coming out. I don't know when they'll be ready. One game is essentially ready now. We could probably finish up the artwork and finish up the rules reviews and things like that. Honestly, in a month, it's done, and it's
Nice.
It is. I hate saying this because obviously I'm the designer. If I'm going to sit here and say it's great, nobody should.
You're not going to say this is the worst game I've ever made, and we're about to go to Kickstarter. Please support us.
But I have to admit, I'm super excited about this one getting out. It's a topic that everybody loves, and but I think a very different angle on it. And then the second game is probably. We just made a big breakthrough. I would have said, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago where it was, I would have said it's 10% of the way there. But I'd say it's 40% of the way there because we made a big breakthrough on things that were holding us back that we couldn't figure out. How do we get through this issue? Our solutions aren't making sense. All of a sudden, you have that eureka moment, and we had a big breakthrough. So that thing is making massive progress now. So I think it'll be this year, but it might go into next year because the second game is going to need all the artwork and things like that. But we definitely have 2 more games that will be coming out in the not too distant future.
Super happy to hear about that. And I know it's always one of those things where you probably feel like you beat your head against the wall until either somebody gives in or you figure out what the right mechanic is and better ways to do things. But that's also half the fun of game design and experimenting with things and seeing what actually kind of molds together to build the theme and to the feel of a game.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, the process is fun. Don't get me wrong; it's fun. But we kept saying on the first game, everybody's in a consensus. We are there. That game is beautiful. The second game, we were never anywhere close to that. We're like this concept is a great concept, but the mechanic we're using doesn't work, or the results we're getting are beautiful, but the amount of work and bookkeeping doesn't make any sense. And at Fortress Games, we're generally opposed to bookkeeping as a part of the game. We just as well. You haven't taken them off your shelves yet, but for those of you in the audience
that's what you said 2 years ago.
That's right. For those of you in the audience who played them, you know that our games are not about bookkeeping. They're about play and being able to go from one turn to the next pretty rapidly. And we were running into problems with that on the second game. But we like I said, we had a fantastic eureka moment, and I feel like the progress is gonna fly now.
Well, let's talk business for a moment. So the nice thing is that you are not like some Kickstarters that are taking years to deliver. You guys are committed to having a finished product before you get out there and not using it as a prospective way to generate income. So has that been a constraint on either the redesign, the second edition for 8th and 20th, or for any of these other projects? Have you been getting antsy in either case, or in every case did it always work out well that everything kind of synced up between when design work was done and when you kind of had your next Kickstarter slot open?
Yeah, we had to. So as you know, our first 2 Kickstarters, we actually tried to, and almost hit it, tried to actually be able to deliver games the day the Kickstarter ended.
Right, and that was a tall order, and I got to say, I was still impressed with the timelines. You did.
Yeah, we came close, but it's tough. We got it to the printer and all that well before the end of the Kickstarter, but then you're at the mercy of vendors, and I wouldn't say anything negative about our print partners. They are awesome. We have 2 main print partners, and they are absolutely awesome, but they go as fast as they can. They need to make sure things are right too. But we got things out very fast within a few weeks of both of those Kickstarters ending. This one's a little bit different because we weren't quite done with the redesign when we were running out of games.
Right.
So we were, 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force have been very popular. We did a big print after we embarrassingly got sold out right after our Kickstarter in 2021. So we did a big print, but happily and sadly, I guess it was sold out almost. It was getting down to the wire. So we said we either have to go send this for another print or we have to launch the Kickstarter. So we launched the Kickstarter a little bit earlier than we would have. I like personally being able to say the Kickstarter ends on, March 30th, let's say. The deliveries start April 1st if you've completed your survey, and
Nice.
we're going to have the games in-house. This won't be the case this time. We've told everybody on Kickstarter we expect to ship in May, and I do expect to ship in May. I'm in contact with our printer all the time, and we're close to finishing things. A lot of it is finished, but we're probably a few weeks away from getting it to the printer, and then they need time. So I think I knock on wood, we should be able to meet that May deadline without much difficulty, given where we are in getting things done. But I'm always disappointed that we aren't delivering the day after the Kickstarter ends. Again, it's a nice problem to have that you just ran out of inventory, so you had to make a choice of either going for another print or doing the second edition a little bit sooner than you wanted to. So,
Right.
Good problem to have. But I think the feedback we've gotten is most people are happy with a May delivery. It's better than, I supported a Kickstarter recently of a game that looks really, really interesting. Not a strategy game. It's a family game, but I know my family and friends we're going to love it. But that game is going to be delivered about 14 months after the Kickstarter ended. Yeah. And that's fine. Yeah. I'll take it. It looks like the game's worth the wait, but that's not how I want to do Kickstarters.
Absolutely. And it's just frustrating for me as a backer sometimes because I'll find out how much I've forgotten that I backed. I'll be like, oh, yeah, I've been waiting for that for a year. Where is that game? Or does they all end up aligning at the same time? And so like 3 games show up at once on my desk. But it's commendable, I guess I should say. It's one of the things that I really like about y'all's model, that you really try to deliver so quickly after Kickstarter. You're not just taking it as developmental cash infusion. You're definitely have a plan, have coordinated with the vendors, and then you're always at the mercy of whatever paper or ink or whatever is the thing that runs out in the supply chain shortage. So we all try to be understanding of that.
We're not, exactly. I appreciate that. We're not delivering in May because we're waiting for the money from the Kickstarter. We will have paid all the bills to print everything and get everything done before the Kickstarter money ever comes to us. So exactly. We're not waiting on a dime from Kickstarter. We are going to move this thing as fast as we can. There's just no way to get it done by the time the Kickstarter ends. But May, like I said, May, most people have been happy with May, and I think we're going to meet it.
That'll be good. So let's talk numbers here. So right now we're basically a week in, and looking at your reprint, we are, let me pull up the latest numbers. 10,997 with 93 backers. So a weekend, you've already beat the total number from last time. So that's obviously good. You've got a couple teasers, as I'll say, out there for us, either previous backers or previous purchasers of the game. So what is it? $35 for a previous Kickstarter backer, and I think $49 for a single copy for previous purchasers. That's super cool. I actually like that. I'm like, okay, I don't feel so guilty now. I can order a second edition that will not sit on my shelf. But it's nice to see that you're giving some credence to people who have the previous versions and saying, look, I know I'm not trying to sell you a whole new game at full MSRP, but please back this and please help deliver this to everybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I consider our original Kickstarters, I don't want to overstate it, but that is like family to me. I mean, those people came through for us. We were nothing, and we were, no one had a reference on who we were or what we were going to do. Yep. And those folks who backed us, we're selling that product at our cost. And when shipping and everything else is considered, we're probably going to lose a little bit on the money on the games we're sending to our original Kickstarter supporters. But boy, am I happy to do it. I mean, those people launched this company, and it thrills me to be able to do that. Same thing with those who have bought the game subsequently through Amazon. Our website links to our Amazon site. We sell it through Amazon because Amazon's easy for us because we don't have to worry about the taxes and things like that. We can concentrate on building games.
Exactly.
Eventually, I suppose someday we'll take that in house. But I really do like the ease of doing business that way. But for those who have supported us that way as well, we want to. They're getting massive discounts. So we want to support our original supporters. Like I said, I think the products that Fortress Games will put out at this point and in the future are going to be superior and highly professional in terms of appearance and content. I think the content, I'm very proud of the content of 8th and 20th in their original versions. Not that proud of the appearance now that we know what the state of the art is and we've been immersed into it. So I want to make that good to the folks who supported us. I want to make that good. And the deals for the games are if you haven't looked at it, anybody who's interested in the game and was an original supporter, you got to look at the deals online because you get those. I think the 2 games, if you buy the 2 games and your original Kickstarter supporter, $59 for both games.
Yeah. I feel like I can't even get anything off Amazon for that cheap these days. So
right.
Yeah,
right.
No, it's a good deal. And I laugh because looking over at my shelves, there are plenty of games I have multiple editions of, and it's not anything new because of Kickstarter or anything else. It's my acquisition that I can sit there and I can look at a couple games that are second and third and follow on editions. So I think you'll have a lot of success there. As a lot of people return and pick up the second edition to see what the difference is, especially because you're offering such good incentives. And it kind of like when I look down at Air War and some of the other ones, it's fun to see how things have evolved and to be able to break out a first edition of the game and then break out a second edition and see counter arts improved and things like that. So,
right. Yeah, it's a labor of love over here. I mean, we are just having a great time making these games, as good as they can be. That's good
to hear because there's a lot of people that get caught up in the rat race of the game industry, and it ceases to be fun. And I think a lot of us can point to companies and people that we know where that has started to wear on them. So it's not that they're enjoying being a part of the gaming community and producing cool new content. They're kind of out there just trying to pay the bills and trying to go through the all the motions of having a business. So I'm glad you guys are still having fun.
Right. Very much so.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, anything else you wanted to ask Bob while we've got him as a captive audience on the podcast?
The 2 things I just kind of made some notes as we were talking as stuff that stuck out to me. I really think, the tactile experience and the look of the game and the thickness of the chits and the board, it's something that if people don't really play games, they don't understand how important that is, right? But when you look at a world of computer simulations, and you can basically simulate anything you want digitally, right? The reason people play games like this is because it is a tactile experience, right? Absolutely. So like seeing the new artwork, seeing that stuff looks really, really awesome. And the other thing I thought was kind of funny is, the what if scenario always comes up, and there's always like those pure historical gamers that are like, no, I don't want to play a what if. And I always kind of just personally chuckle at that because I'm like, isn't the entire game a what if? Like, aren't we playing the game because you don't know what the outcome is? If you already know the outcome of the game, is there a reason to even play the game? Right? I don't know. So the whole kind of aversion to what if stuff I always really don't understand. So it was cool to hear about the jet fighters and that kind of stuff. I'm kind of psyched to see some of those optional rules.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, obviously I've been playing it a ton, and I like those dogfights between the German jets and the American jets. It's fun, and again, if it was completely to your point, if it was just a complete fantasy and nonsense, I don't know how good it is, but it really could have happened, and it wouldn't have even required that much. I mean, Hiller's interference in the jet program is well known, as I said, to everybody in this audience. But what if he'd been very supportive of a jet fighter program and And what if, Goering wasn't stoned in Karen Hall and instead was concentrating on
what if Goering wasn't an idiot?
Yeah,
the guy that was always playing with model trains too. Is that guy?
Pretty much.
Yeah. What if Goering wasn't playing with model trains and was focused? I mean, it really could have happened. It's not a way out there a possibility. It could have happened, and there's a good chance if it had happened that the American response would have been, we have to accelerate our jet program. I mean,
right.
The American commanders of the 8th Air Force and the strategic commanders back in Washington, when the Germans introduced jets, they were a little spooked by it, but they knew the war was virtually, the war was going to be won, and the P-51s and P-47s were superior aircraft that could stand up for the duration that was required till the end of the war. But if they were still looking at, if it was still before the D-Day invasion and German jets were rising up and fighting American fighters and bombers, something would have had to been done.
They would not have taken that.
Plus the F-80's just so cool looking. Anytime it can squeeze that thing in a game, you got to go for it, right?
It is.
Well, you're going to like it then because it's there.
Then you like it. I just laugh because I've had such a love-hate relationship with early jet things, and now I'm at the point where I like it again. I like late World War II, I like Korean era stuff, but I used to absolutely hate the look of those airplanes.
Well, they're very different.
Hitting my retro phase.
No, I hear you. And if you're like me and you grew up when the F-4 Phantom was the mainstay of the American Air Force, it was such a beautiful, admittedly ungainly, but just a beautiful jet. You look at the Bell P-59 Era Comet or the Gloucester Meteor.
The Meteor.
Yeah, the Meteor is not an attractive plane, but it's pretty cool in the game though. So, but I agree with you. Comparing a modern fighter or the beautiful Phantom jets to the original Sabre. Well, Sabre was a good looking plane, but the original like World War II era jets, they were very different look.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, anything you want to say in closing? Any other topics or things we need to cover before we wrap this up?
No, I think I think we covered it all, and I just want to thank you and Steve for having me on and give me a chance to talk about what we're trying to do for our existing customers who we value tremendously, and to future customers who I hope take an interest.
Absolutely. And so it's still live on Kickstarter, so you can still find it out there for 8th Air Force, 20th Air Force, and that'll be running for a couple more weeks after this podcast gets released. And how does everyone find you on the internet for Fortress Games? You can find Fortress Games at www.fortressgamesusa.com. And the Kickstarter, just go to Kickstarter and look up 8 with the number 8th 8th Air Force and 20th Air Force with the number, and you'll find it. And we got about it's running till I should have that date right off the tip of my tongue, shouldn't I? But I don't. But it's running for till late March. Okay, outstanding. So quite a while to go on that. Well, thanks. I really appreciate it, Bob. And I would have some witty closing here, but Steve continues to fail me and not write any witty closings for me. So thanks for joining us. I would like to say to our podcast listeners, thank you for listening and supporting the podcast. As always, please give us your feedback. Go out there, support the podcast. And Pat from Mariner Games will shame me if I don't put a shameless plug in there and say, go to Mariner Games, mariner.games, and check out his new game that is slowly making its way out into the world. So basically, Star Force Commander is a ship combat game. Go take a look at it. There's downloadable print and play versions. There's some sample versions out there for free. Take a look at it and give us your feedback on that, because Pat's really enjoyed bringing that game into production and bringing that out to the world and getting a lot of reviews on that. So please continue to like and share the podcast, and we will talk to everyone as they check their 6 and climb for advantage. That's actually the stupidest outro ever. That's all right.
It's starting to grow on you, I can tell.
God.